Australian-American filmmaker and director Nathaniel Schmidt's award-winning work explores extreme weather and lived experiences. The Last Daughter is a poignant documentary co-directed by and featuring Wiradjuri woman Brenda Matthews on a journey to find her white family and uncover the truth about her abduction. The Last Daughter has a national release on June 15 and is also a part of the 2023 Sydney Film Festival. Nathaniel Schmidt, thank you so much and welcome to the For Your Reference podcast.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Well, first off, congratulations on a great film, a very important film. I know Brenda also has the book as well, but I think it would be great to start off with, how did you come across Brenda's story and when did you both decide we need to come together and we need to make this film?
Yeah, so I remember when I first heard Brenda's story, I was in the Crocodile Hotel in Jabiru in the Northern Territory. And
wow.
I was connected. Someone told me about this story,
Mm-hmm.
and we were connected through an elder, a Bundjalung elder, who connected us to Brenda and her husband Mark. And then we met at Currumbin RSL in the Gold Coast and just started talking and hearing her amazing story. And there was just the very, very beginning. That was over, 5 or 6 years now. And so it's been a long journey since then, but we at the very, very beginning, as soon as we heard the crux of the story, we knew this was something that I'd never heard before. And it was a story that this nation needed to hear.
Yeah, especially because there's, I guess, the general sort of talking about, which we'll get into more detail. But I think even the angle, even though it is her personal life, like that particular type of story is very new to, I guess, mainstream sort of screens as well. And because it is a documentary, I do have a couple of questions about the actual process and the making of. And I think that's also good to point out. It's not just like a year or half a year and you just churn out like a gorgeous film about someone's life. It takes time to, nurture and simmer and that sort of thing. But in regards to the making of the film and the actual cut of it, how did you both decide when to be present in the actual moment where we are now, and I guess when to go back in time to give us sort of context? There are also moments where we would focus on one person like Brenda and we might go to Connie, for example. So what was that like?
Yeah, so that was something that we debated and talked about as a team for a while on the in and out points between the past and present story. So and a lot of it was guided by simply how Brenda remembered her own life. So Brenda, as a child, all of her memories start in this white family. And so Brenda's whole experience was what she can actually remember, for whatever reason that is. She remembers growing up in this loving white family. And then for her, everything's flipped in reverse when she's shocked by having to go back to her Aboriginal family where she really belongs. Yeah. She had no memory of the past. She didn't know all those things. So just as this little girl, Brenda is trying to figure out her existence and where she belongs. But when she went back to her Aboriginal family, that's when all these feelings of like missing the white family, but feeling like she couldn't miss them because she's supposed to be in the Aboriginal family. So as a little girl, 8 years old or 7 years old, that's where Brenda's childhood like wound starts. And then as an adult, we're flicking back and forth between these moments that are kind of these key beats between that past and present story.
And I don't want to butcher it, but there was a gorgeous opening line to this film as well, where Brenda shares a sentiment of, you only start to unpack these things once you get older, when you become an adult, right?
Yeah. That was something that Brenda said at the very beginning when I first met her. We did her like first kind of just understanding the story. That was something that always stuck with me and has stayed true the whole journey. Was as a child you push things down. Yeah. When you become an adult, the things bubble up. And I think that's kind of like the sentiment to her story, but so many others.
Yeah, it must be interesting to have lines and like, oh, we're going to put this here. Like this line is going to be at the start of the film and it's going to inform it as well. Yeah,
it just created the nice hook we needed to, I think, just lure people into this incredible story.
Yeah. And there's something that you said that I wanted to touch on. about, Brenda feeling guilty because, not feeling completely whole because she has that periphery of her white family, but then also not wanting to, not wanting to fracture the current situation that she has with her Aboriginal family. And that was something that, even as a watcher, I was like, oh, I can only imagine what it would be like for my mum and how she would feel if I were to go. And I was like, oh, and then I was in and I was staying. And yeah, it was definitely a sort of like conflict watching that, but you also understand it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. Like that's been a core thing, I think, from Brenda's experience the whole way through is just how do you feel, how are you supposed to feel when you've been raised by these two different families? And in this case, she was loved by both families, but Brenda still felt torn and not really knowing who she should be, how she should be, what she could say or be around her family. And so that's been for Brenda this big, thing that she's had to deal with her whole life.
And I guess flowing on from that, this is again more about making of the film. Were there moments where it was uncomfortable to continue filming, or even after filming, deciding whether to keep it in the final edit? I don't want to spoil too much about the film, but there was a moment where they went to the courthouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of the uncomfortable moments, were not necessarily always what you would expect. But like when we went back to Gilgandra, which is the town where Brenda and her siblings were removed from their parents. That was a really important trip for not only Brenda, but her mother, because that was the first time going back there since it all happened. And so it was kind of like Brenda wanting to take her mother and to revisit all these places of trauma of her past. That place was also a place of joy for them once as well. So it was kind of like that's where all their family connect. Bone is, where a lot of the mob come from. And we still talk about that fondly, but yet there's this painful memory in that place as well. And so, as Brenda mentions in the film, going back and to these places of pain brings a sense of healing, and so for Brenda and her family anyway, so I guess as far as like filming in those moments, there, and it was just with the whole thing was always tread carefully and at the utmost was relationship, we had the trust and I think they knew what we were trying to do, with this whole film. And so they went to those hard places because we were there to help them in sharing this story that hasn't really been told the right way before.
And I think that's just it, especially I'm Tongan, but I was born in this country. And there's an uneasiness from non-Indigenous people to talk about our Indigenous history in this country. And there's that, and there's also art, and, there's having those hard sort of conversations, which sometimes is easier through a documentary instead of having like a one-to-one sort of conversation. Was there a consciousness on the comfortability of non-Indigenous people when you were making this film?
Oh, totally. Like, I think Larissa Brent kind of summed it up best, who was mentored me and Brenda in the process. She basically said, I like it how you're Trojan horsing, the Stolen Generation story, particularly for non-Indigenous people. We start with a non-Indigenous family, which is a unique access point to this whole story that I don't think we've ever seen before. And it flips everything on its head. And basically, imagine if a white family had their child taken away from them and then put
news
back
story, headlines everywhere.
Yeah. So like that was kind of the interesting of how do we, so, and particularly, Connie and Mac, very, like for a non-Indigenous Australian family, like their last name's Ockers, for crying out loud, which is like the most Australian last name ever. So it just created a really accessible doorway, I think, for non-Indigenous people. And that's definitely been the response we've had thus far. And even just how they've responded to each other, the two families, without giving too much away, has been really something that's, I think, opened a lot of people to something they maybe would not otherwise choose to engage with. So yeah, the story, is remarkable just on its own without us getting involved, That's been our experience anyway.
But there's definitely credit to the care that was taken into making this film. And, you talk about elders and Larissa Brandt that you work with to make this film, and that's so important. It's not like an Avatar made in isolation, like sort of film, even though, James Cameron is great, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were so many touch points on this film. And even what you're saying, we're talking about the film, and it is about the stolen generation. And there was a moment in the film where, officially, historically 1969, but we're talking about, was it 1974 for Brenda?
Brenda was taken in 1973.
1978, wasn't it?
4 years after the act supposedly ended.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, how do we reconcile what we think we maybe knew that we never talked about?
Yeah.
And whether it is that same label, it still has very real ramifications for everyone.
Yeah, totally. I think what was always really important to me, and I think the rest of the team as well, is regardless of what you know about the system and the rules and what's right, what's not right, these are just people trying to deal with something that happened to them.
Yeah.
Because children were taken away, and that has flow-on and consequences that affected a whole bunch of different people. And 40 years later, they're just trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
They're just families trying to figure it out, and Brenda's at the center of that.
Yeah, and I think leading with love is very important, and that was definitely present in the film. That was literally my next question of how do you balance the historical facts with the personal experience? But let's continue. I do have a last question, but before my last question, I wanted to talk about the reunion scene. We don't need to spoil it too much, but that was some beautiful Black Indigenous joy. I just, my little heart just grew so much. Were you present at the time? How was it filming that?
Oh, yeah. That was actually early on in the piece. And so we had Brenda always wanted to meet the families to come together in Sydney. That was kind of like the halfway point between the two families. And it was a bit crazy just trying to get it all to happen. But then and all the nerves, all the feeling were real on all sides. Everything you're feeling in that moment was real. I remember going down with Mark to pick up Connie and Mac and filming that, but also filming Brenda and her mother just the night before, driving down from Toronto, where she lives, to Sydney, and just Nan feeling those nerves, but just the most beautiful way of just saying why she wanted to do this. I think, like, I was just talking to someone last night at the screening, and just that hits people so emotionally hard every time that what she has to step up and why she has to do this, even though she doesn't have to.
Yeah.
To meet these people, I just was so, so emotional. And just when everything took place, like Mark always says, her husband just says every time, like, even the sound guy was like shaking when putting on labs and all these things. So there's this story behind the story that we've all been on, and so like coming back to Sydney for us is pretty emotional, just because like a lot of the stories taking place here and being here at the festival and all that. Like I just had coffee with Nan this morning. And so it's a different season for us now after knowing each other for so long. And but now we've always just said, like, Nan, your story's getting told now. Like the truth's getting out there, even though you've been lied about for so many years, like I thought everyone knows about that. But to her, that's been the hurt and the pain. She's been carrying this lie for so long.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of core to a connection, really getting to the truth. And I'm so glad that there is that feeling of release as well. And I do want to give a little shout out to Mark, because we didn't get to talk about even Mac and Connie, but like a shout out to Mark as well, because, Brenda was talking about how she would share, and every time she would share, the trauma would come back, but there would also be that feeling of peace. And you can definitely feel that Mark was a great support in all of that as well. So, definitely all around. It was led with love. I felt the love watching it. And I'm so happy that there is a release to the feeling of everyone that's involved as well. But we're going to finish off with our last question, if that's okay.
Yep.
We finish off our reviews with a recommendation. So what would you pair with The Last Daughter as a double feature sort of situation?
Oh, that's a great question. Like documentary or anything? Like,
It can be anything that helped you to be inspired, or yeah, anything.
I mean, a lot of the films that were kind of like inspired us, like obviously, like Lion was a great film. Like,
Oh, gorgeous. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like, and I think for us, we had our Lion moment, that reunion ourselves, So like the similarity in our film of just like people who have been separated for so long. And I was even just thinking that, imagine, like there's a photo of someone in your
Yeah.
house, and they're part of your family, but they're no longer part of your family. And that's what Brenda was in both families. Who's this girl in this family and who's this girl in this family? And then after all this time, they reconnect, and that relationship, comes back together. And I think so for me, like Lion was very much a big inspiration, I think, emotionally, what we were trying to do. But it just naturally happened that way. I think it does when people come together. So
Yeah.
I think a Lion would be a good pair, or any of the amazing other Aboriginal stories that have been done, across the years. Like I think like we just saw New Boy, that
Oh,
tells
gorgeous.
a
Yeah.
story. It was a different story at a different time. Obviously, like I think Rabbit Proof Fence is the original Stolen Generation story that a lot of Australians have come to see, and I think this continues that story to show that this didn't end in the old days. These things are still happening. I think that was also a thing for us that we're always thinking of. This is like this is the continuation of this story in this generation, and here's living proof in this day and era to show that people are still dealing with the pains of the past.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you answering that, because we have been interviewing a lot of filmmakers lately, and I'll throw that question. That was a great. Lion is a great. Rabbit Proof Fence. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for this film. I would like to extend that thank you to Brenda and the family as well. But I really appreciate your time. And again, thank you so much, and congratulations on a great film.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.